I can give you the story on exactly which island that we moved to when we sold our first company, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. So you sell your company, and we happened to sell it back in April 2001, which from a timing point of view is not too shabby. NASDAQ being at 5,100, if you have a 50-man band, which is profitable, you can certainly make $10 or $20 off of that. And we sold the company for tens of millions of dollars, and overnight went from cereal to a different dining experience. And we moved to Trinidad and Tobago, so I took my wife and kids and everything and moved to the islands and lived off mojitos for a while, which is actually really difficult if you think about it. And it sounds like it's not. It sounds like, sure, whatever. But that is actually really difficult. I'm certainly not good at it. I can do my 7 mojitos. I can do it certainly for 2 months straight. But one morning, you need something else. That's the pina coladas, of course. And then you do another 2 months stretch. But that's where you go. I think I've moved on since then, and we've done a number of companies above and beyond that first startup. And the last one, as Judah said, was acquired by Yahoo. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I think, as I put on my one slide here, there is this opportunity for us to look at content as a product. And that might sound overly simple, or as a strategy that we can just go implement everywhere, and people will be fond of that idea if I can take learnings from different industries applied to publishing. I don't think it's that easy, or certainly it hasn't been that easy for me walking in the newsroom of the Telegraph and tell them that what you do, or what you've done for the last 2 or 3 decades, if not the last century, that is not the right way to do it. They're not overly enthusiastic to have that statement pushed forward. But I do think that if we just take one step back and look at some of the statements that we are reading, whether that be in the printed press or whether that be anywhere else, that content for some reason is sacred. And especially if you take the news media segments in particular, that content is something which is wholly to the point where I can't really allow myself to either optimize or promote it to the same extent that we'll see retailers go promote their products. On the flip side of that, we've also agreed, without ever really signing off on it, that products, any widget that we can find, we're allowed to prostitute that any way possible. That is okay. If I want to sell a pair of sneakers, I can go all in. All that really matters is that I maximize the amount of sneakers that I sell. Nobody really cares whether Amazon is selling more blue sneakers versus red sneakers. Just sell the most. But for some reason in content, it's not about most. It's not about maximizing. They'll use words like editorial tone, integrity. And I'm not saying those are suboptimal concepts. I think those are great concepts. I'm just not sure that they apply to every corner of publishing. So if you think about it just for a second here, there's certainly some publishers that will produce content that, at least in my opinion, is not upholding democracy. That publication is not the fourth estate. That is just content produced within a framework that they're happy with, so they can go generate revenue off of it and turn, hopefully, that revenue into a sustainable business. And I think there are some products that are, to some degree, just as much an art as a great article in The Economist. But that Venn diagram, if we were to kind of look at that, most people have the idea that they're completely separated. In my world, certainly, they are, if not a complete overlap, then certainly almost a complete overlap. I do believe that we have certain publications that can allow themselves the rights to say that they have a civic responsibility of informing the public of whether that be corruption 40 blocks up or something else. I do understand that. I'm not so naive that I can't see that there's no value in having a press or a media that makes sure that that is kept intact. I'm just not sure if I look at the 1,450-something dailies in the US or if I look at that top 1,000 media sites that I can find in Europe, that every single one of them can be held to that set of ethics. Yes, I could probably count 5, but I'm not sure, InStyle or People Magazine or Fast Company or Wired or the Business Insider or any one of those properties, which are all fantastic properties and publishers in their own right, but I think they're just businesses that are there to make a profit. And if that is the case, and I think at some points, before you even think about whether you should apply a new social media strategy or a new organic search strategy or any type of optimization strategy, that you have to kind of come to terms with the fact that I am allowed to optimize my content, just like I'm allowed to go prostitute any widget that I have in stock. And if publishers or we in here can kind of come to terms with that, I think there's tons of opportunities for us to learn how to make more of what we have in our inventory. And just as an example here, and this is something which we spend all our time doing in my new venture, is to create this, and that's certainly our vision, and that might be bold. It was certainly bold the other night when I told it to Michael Bloomberg at this event. He was not completely sold instantly, but I told him that I want to create that Bloomberg terminal of the newsroom, and he said, "But that's my name." Yes, but still. I think there's certainly 4 concepts that we like to attack, but that's our view. I think the concepts themselves hold true whether you attack them manually, through strategy, through change of processes, through a new workflow, through different vendors, through your current web analytics tool, or what have you. And those 4 concepts are what I describe as demand, the ability to produce, and the willingness to promote, and a very well understanding of how this is consumed. And I want to talk about these 4 concepts and just a couple pointers to where I think there's a relationship to content as a product or any kind of industry that certainly treat their inventory with, I think, greater respect than a lot of publishers. So the first one here is that it seems obvious that if Judah and I were to start a Walmart on the Upper West Side, that we would figure out the market size or the market opportunity, and we would do some sort of research to figure out what we should stock in that store, and we'll make the appropriate analysis to figure out how to actually go execute against this. For some reason, that seems not to be the case in publishing, where, and I'm not saying that they go produce willy-nilly, but they're certainly more in tune with the idea that news or content or the idea to produce new content just arrives. And whatever happens, I'll describe that and I'll produce X number of content pieces on a daily basis. I'm not sure there's a connect really here with that you just wait and see what happens. But you should, in that demand phase, figure out that if I'm Engadget and I know that there's demand for the rumored iPhone 5, I should figure out exactly what that demand is. Is that 10 stories every day for the next 4 months? I think that's obvious to all of us that is not the case. Is it 1 story over the next 4 months? I think that is as obvious that that is not the case either. But what is it then? It's certainly not just one of their journalists to decide that he'll randomly, when he feels like it, write up a story about the new upcoming iPhone 5. Why is that not planned? Why are they not trying to predict what that demand is? Why are they not trying to measure what that might be? Why haven't they created a cluster of interests of this audience so they can actually produce content against that? And you do see some people try to do this, and for some reason, and I think that is clear to everybody here why that is the case, they are labeled as content farms and any other negative connotation that you can apply to it. But all they really try to do is pick the easiest part of the equation, which is the tail end of the market, or evergreen content, if you will, which is much easier to predict the demand of. So cheap vacations to the Caribbean, there's a constant demand for that interest, and you can produce content against that. It's a whole lot more difficult to produce content against a political climate as we're in right now, but you need to try to figure that out anyway. So what we do, and what I think anybody should do here, is to help their publishers in predict upcoming demand. But not only predict upcoming demand like you would do in retail, but you should predict the value of that upcoming demand. And that kind of brings me into my next point, which is, if I reach a point where I at least participate in predicting demand at whatever level my ambition might be at, I should not surrender to the fact that now that I predicted the demand, I will just assign this as a set of tasks to some content producers, perhaps even journalists, and say that you should write against this demand. I think that with this demand and this associated value comes a responsibility of producing that piece of content in the most cost-effective way. Again, if you look at publishers today, the way they produce content is more along the lines of the journalist might even figure out the demand himself. He decides whether this is a 200-word piece, a 1,500-word piece. He might decide, or at least influence, whether this is one of the stories that we go by some images from Getty, or whether we actually send one of our own photographers, or whether we actually travel to this story. So there needs to be some sort of decision process here. But how can you even decide that we're going to send 2 people to California to cover this upcoming Apple event? That might be the obvious one. But how do you decide that? And I think this is a good example in public knowledge. So the New York Daily News, which is one of our customers, they'll have 6, 7 in-house photographers. They'll do about 150 stories a day. Not all of those stories can have pictures that they've taken themselves and are in control of. Some of those stories will have images from a whole host of sources. But how do they choose that? You need to have some logic applied to that equation so you maximize the value of 6, 7 salaries in Manhattan. That's $1 million cost that you need to kind of figure out how you get a decent return on. And once you figure out how you can produce in the most cost-effective way, and that's not just whether it's the length of the story, whether it's the picture material, whether this is one of those stories that you want to add video to, whether this is just one of those stories that you do not want to do. You can simply not justify to participate in this set of stories. It is in less demand. We cannot produce content at that level. We might even just link to it. I think that's fair. I actually think that's exactly where aggregation comes into play in the most optimal way. Not in the idea of copying and pasting content from somebody else's property, but the idea of I cannot produce content for this demand, for my audience, and make money on it. And I think there's a whole set of aspects around making sure that you actually produce this content in an optimal way. But once you produce the content, whether you've applied science to that equation or not, that doesn't really matter. But once you've reached that point in time, you're at the point of no return. That means I've produced 150 pieces of content today, if I'm the New York Daily. I produced 40 pieces of content a day if I'm People magazine. I produced 15 pieces of content a day if I'm Fast Company. I produced 5 pieces of unique content a day if I'm the Connecticut Post. I might have a pool of 20-something stories that I have syndicated from the AP. But that is a pool of content that I've either produced, which is extremely expensive, or which I've syndicated at a cost. But I need to now, in my opinion, promote the hell out of it. I simply can't see why it is not my responsibility to maximize the value of the products which I've produced. Why is it that for some reason it's become a sin to maximize the value of that? And I'm not saying that we should compromise on our integrity or that we should turn every publication into a glorified Lindsay Lohan machine. That is not my point at all. And we've done tons of these studies where this whole idea of a lowest common denominator, which is all Kim Kardashian, Lindsay Lohan, titty, another gallery, and there you are. That is just not the case. That's a fantasy that the media would like us to believe so they can kind of keep doing what they've done, or at least that's how I see it, for decades. But you should promote the hell out of this content. But you should do that within a framework, just like Nike is trying to promote the hell out of every single sneaker that they've designed, but within a framework. You're not seeing them in certain stores. You do see them in other stores. You do see them promoted at a certain level. They have a framework for where they believe that in the long term, we're going to be better off if we keep this intact. Just like you won't see the in-store Apple sell in certain places, but in other places you might say do see it. And when I talk about promoting the hell out of this story, I think the first distinction that we might have to do here is the one where we in publishing have agreed that the same person is responsible from start to end. He will figure out the demand, he will speak to his sources, he'll produce the content to the best of his ability, and he'll go promote it. He's been encouraged to set up his own Twitter account. He's been encouraged to use the right keywords. He's been encouraged to do a number of things. He's not even the expert, but he's been encouraged to do so. Why is it that if we look at anything but publishing, these two roles have been split apart? There's somebody who produces your widgets, then somebody else takes over and sells them for you. You don't see the guy at the factory, take home Tupperware style a set of widgets selling to his neighbors. That just doesn't make any sense. But it makes sense in publishing for some reason that, this guy at Reuters, he'll kind of go tweet his own stories. Isn't that just, in my world, a little bit immature? Shouldn't we kind of split these two apart? There's some people actually responsible for producing it, and then somebody takes over in a complete unbiased environment and says, fair enough, we have an editor-in-chief, or we have a long-term strategy, and we put a framework in place, and that framework, sure, I'll make sure that we promote within that framework. That could be that we don't want Lindsay Lohan at the featured position on the front page of the Telegraph, which is one of our customers. And no, we're not allowed to recommend that. And even if we did, they wouldn't take it. And they shouldn't take it, because they would probably be worse off in the long term, happier today or over the next couple of hours, I'm most sure. But in the long term, they'll be worse off. So split these two apart is certainly an option. Once you split them apart and you put this into the hands of, say, a very capable editor, I think we've made a mistake recently where it's become somewhat allowed to apply just a little bit of science to the equation. That we think data equals decision support, or that giving access to data make people wiser. I'm not sure that is the case, though. I think we could end up in scenarios where people are, to put it politely, not smarter. I think they could be worse off. I think they could end up taking scenarios that they believe are right, turn them into best practices, and repeat them over and over again as if this is the right thing to do. And we see this happen all the time. A very good example of what happens before we arrive and work with people is that they will install a free Google Analytics or I think Alex is here today, a fantastic web trends application, and promote a story in the hero spot, close your eyes, open them in 2 minutes, go look at the most viewed pages, and now this is going to be the most viewed page. Why? Because you put it there, you created a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you're not really data-driven. All you are is somebody who wants to believe. You're somewhat tainted by your own bias of wanting to be right. And I don't think we should give access. I don't think we should be handing out willy-nilly credentials to YWA or GA or Web Trends or Armature. I think that is almost the worst thing we can do. I think we need to provide the right people, especially in publishing, with the right tools. And with the right tools, I think we should not try to change people. I think an analyst is an analyst. I think an editor is an editor. I don't think we should turn an editor into an analyst. I don't think giving him a bar chart here or a trend chart there, or if you read these 3 numbers, obviously you should move this story up or kill this story, move it to the section front, or produce more content. How is he supposed to conclude on that? How can we expect him to conclude on this and conclude on this correctly? How can we even expect him to conclude on this to the extent where we're sure that he's not damaging our business? So I think they need proper decision support. Just like I think we all agree here that if we were given a check on $1 million and a free E-Trade account, and we could just go trade stocks, we wouldn't really be experts. I'm sure there's one guy in here who believes that he will be the expert, but I don't think we will be the experts. I think we would fail, or perhaps even if we're lucky, turn it into 900K. That's nice. We have some money that we can spend. There's still some mojitos left in the bank, but I don't think that's what we're supposed to be. I don't think we should turn ourselves into stock traders just because we have money. I don't think we should turn editors into analysts just because we have data. But once we reach that point where we accept that this might have to be split apart into 2 roles, and once we've provided them the right tools so they can go take proper decisions, that we actually empower them. We don't give them more questions, we're trying to give them some answers. I think we come into that kind of 4th element, which we can describe as consuming the content or using the product, if you think about this from a product point of view. But for some reason, you can see tons of product people talk about the experience once you've acquired the product. So once you acquire an iPhone, or a pair of Nike sneakers, or a new tie, there's an experience that happens after you acquired it. In publishing, once you've acquired the magazine or clicked the article, they're done. The attitude is that, task is done. You're on your own now. I'm not sure that is the right attitude, though, because there must be the idea of lifetime customer value, downstream engagement, love and care for the brand. And I don't think you can just give up after that click. Most people in product will think about that point in time as that's where the journey starts, not where it ends. And if that is where the journey starts, you need to have a different attitude towards how you want people to consume this. And I'm not talking about creating the perfect article page. Certainly there's a number of templates that are worse than others. But I'm talking about the idea of thinking of this as part of that kind of content optimization life cycle, which is, why don't I localize this? So I expect that the outlet to my iPad kind of fits the outlet in the wall when I buy it over here. But obviously, if I go buy it in Europe, I would expect that the outlet fits whatever outlet we have in the wall in Europe. That's kind of something which I don't even ask for. Why is it that if there's a reference point in a story to some financial scandal, that the reference point is a US reference point when they know that I arrived from Holland? Why don't you create a reference point for me? Or if you have an international audience, you can do some fairly basic segmentation and localize this. I'm not talking about the basic idea of just translating it. I'm talking about proper localization. That we don't do. Why is that if I go, and that is a killer property, and we do work with people, and as a fun piece of trivia, actually, and you can't tweet this, we have this concept of persistent editorial instruction. So when we provide a recommendation for what goes on the front page ahead of time, we don't provide something which is so aggressive that the editor can't accept it. And we actually have more editorial instructions in place for what we did for people than we did for what we did for the Telegraph. They are really good at being people. They're actually really good at doing exactly that. And I thought I could just, pull it out and just optimize, all over the place at timing. That is not the case at all. But what I think you should really care for here is not just whether you localize it or not. Why is it that concepts which have been known in media actually, take Hollywood, they've worked concepts like windowing for years. So why is it that if I really want to sell more tablet editions of the San Francisco Chronicle, why is it that the content don't arrive on that 5 minutes before everything else? I'm not saying that's a good idea, but I'm saying, why is that not even being talked about? Why is that not being worked? That's a concept that we all know. We know it works. But that's not really it. That's something where everything just goes everywhere as soon as possible. Why is it that I don't delay some content, just in general? That publishing this content holds more value later because somebody else is kind of working the same space. Again, just don't have to go any further than Hollywood. You'll see that they actually don't promote 3 blockbuster movies over the same weekend. They actually try to somewhat coordinate this, or at least try to figure out when can I maximize the value of my product. I don't really care about what my competitors are doing, but I certainly want to maximize my product. And if everybody is covering that Apple event today, and I'm going to do the same, and that might just be the best idea. But have you even figured out, perhaps I should do the longer stories tomorrow, or my commentary comes tomorrow in a different form. Perhaps I could win at that, but it's not really being considered. And then, of course, all the way down to personalization. But I don't think that's really where we're headed. And I don't think that's needed. I'm personally not even a big fan of full-on personalization. So, in conclusion, and I think this is certainly important from my viewpoint, I'm not talking about publishing surrendering to the lowest common denominator. I strongly believe that the tests that we've done and the data that we've had access to proves that when we remove every editorial filter that we put in place, that it doesn't turn into galleries of people we don't want to look at anyway. We did one test, which I think is a good story, on actually the biggest newspaper in New York that runs a online destination as well, and we removed all of the persistent editorial instructions for a week so we could have, together with them obviously, a study of where would we end. If we completely catered to the taste of the audience, where do we end? And you know what? It was not the galleries, and they do galleries well. I've been sucked into those galleries, a lot of times, where I think I'm doing QA and all of a sudden I'm looking at Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. It's like, I thought I was doing QA. But what we did over that week was just remove all the filters, and what we ended up recommending was all New York crime. I'm not saying that's better, I'm just saying that's what we ended. If we completely surrendered to the taste of the audience, we'll be talking about those 17 shootings in Manhattan about 4 weeks ago. They had 3 or 4 stories on that. We would have that incident at McDonald's with the beating and the video and what have you. But that's where we ended, not gossip or entertainment. And if you think about it, so that it's not the New York Times, but take any one of the other 2 newspapers, then perhaps this is exactly what they're supposed to write about. I actually don't think this is sad in any way. I think if I want to read about strong political commentary or international news, I might buy the Times. If I'm buying any one of the other 2 newspapers, you know what? I'm actually just buying them to figure out whether I can safely send my kids to school in Chelsea. So, you tell me the story. So, it doesn't have to be all bad. I think it's going to be, in my view, and I'm obviously extremely biased here, so don't take any notes. But I think that there's an opportunity here for us to be more data-driven. I think we can introduce the idea of the data-driven newsroom in some capacity. And I do think, or at least that's our vision, that coming up with that Bloomberg terminal for editors might not be too bad an idea. Thank you very much.